our first Franklin County Family and Children First Council community support and conversation Zoom meeting. We're really honored to have the privilege to talk with folks and to share what we hope will be some useful, practical, beneficial support for folks as we all go through this difficult time together. My name is Jesse Schrader. I am one of the deputy directors of our Building Better Lives initiative, which is our trauma-informed care initiative that was started about 8 years ago as we started to work with Dr. Perry and other leaders in our community around trauma-informed care initiatives. And over the last 8 years, we've been able to connect with a lot of different agencies in our county and across the state, which is how many of you heard from us over the last couple of days and weeks and how you heard about this meeting. So our hope today is to share just a little bit of introductory content as we're kind of all in this challenging time together, together as a community, together as a state, and really as a country, really as a globe, as the world. We're working together through this challenge. There's been a ton of information sent out. If your inbox is anything like mine, every day, every listserv or speaker or conference I've ever attended is sending me information about how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I just want to say up front that I appreciate everybody taking the time to spend with us today. Our hope today is that we're going to provide just some introductory information on regulating and brain-based trauma-informed content that will provide you a couple of pointers of how to help yourself, as well as helping your clients, your families, the children and the families that we're all working with. So when we're talking about trauma-informed brain-based content, we're always thinking at three levels. We're thinking for ourselves, we're thinking for the adults and the families we're working with, the caregivers, grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, and then also the children, the clients that we're working with. So we're going to share just some introductory concepts, and then we want to really open up this conversation for folks in the community to ask questions, to share successes, to share challenges, and for us to connect with each other. So let me just say a couple of things about that, and I'll do one more introduction and we'll jump in. My guess is by now many of you have gotten used to Zoom, and so I see a few folks are using the chat room over there. Please feel free to use the chat box there to ask questions, to raise challenges, or to even share successes or resources. As we're talking about things, you might have a really good resource that you want to put out there for the group, so feel free to put that in the chat box. If I'm talking about a concept or something and you're thinking, okay, yeah, good idea, but what does that look like in this situation? Put that question in there, please, and share that question and share that challenge. Chances are, if you are having difficulty applying that, you're probably not the only one, but maybe we can help each other out with this. And just two more quick things on that. I just wanted to let folks know that my colleague, Debbie Holycross, is going to be helping me with kind of facilitating. So she'll be following that chat box and jumping in with questions. She'll try to keep an eye on if anyone has questions that they want to jump in with. You can kind of use that participation button to raise your hand or put something in the chat box, and she'll work with you to unmute your microphone there, and feel free to jump in on the microphone and ask a question. So with that being said, I also just really quickly, I see our agency director, Jane, is on the call as well. So Jane, I'm gonna unmute you. You wanna just say hello real quick to folks? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was excited to see how many people joined us today, and at least for me, it has been so important to really keep in touch with people, both verbally and also to see everybody's faces is really important, I think, in that communication change. So we're looking forward to not only sharing some information we have, but this really only works if you share the thoughts and information that you have also. So really think of it as a community conversation, not a webinar. And even though we can't get together in the same room, I'm really grateful that and looking forward to hearing your your thoughts and comments as well as Jesse's. And thanks to Jesse for leading this, and to Debbie for being part of the mechanics of it. So once again, thank you.
Great, thanks, Jane. So I'm gonna be using my screen share quite a bit here today, and let me just put up initially the first message that we sent out through email that I believe many of you saw. And this is going to be the main content that I'm going to work through today. Just briefly, like I said, we want this to be a conversation. So even though I'll be kind of talking about this, please feel free to chime in, ask questions, or make comments. Debbie is going to post this file in the chat box there as well. So if you haven't already seen this document, you'll have access to that. I also just wanted to let you know that we created both a service providers version of this that is a little bit longer, and we also have a parent version that is a single page that is meant to be a little bit quicker, a little bit more easily accessible with a little bit less clinical language. So we have both of those files that are available to you to please share with your families, share with your clients and whom you're working with. But for the sake of kind of talking through things, I'm going to just use a simple slide deck here. So we are kind of just starting the conversation today around this idea of regulating through a pandemic. Certainly a dysregulated and scary word. I know for me, even just thinking about the idea that we are living through a pandemic is pretty incredible. I saw an article from The Atlantic yesterday that said the next generation they are talking about is Generation C, meaning Generation Coronavirus, that they will be defined by this experience. So we're going through this global, once in a century, once in a generation experience, and it's pretty incredible. So how can we even begin to start to regulate? Again, there's a ton of ideas that are being thrown out there around handling your anxiety or dealing with different challenges. But if you've spent any time with us in our Building Better Lives initiative, you know that we focus on regulation first. If your brain isn't regulated, if those lower parts of your brain that are always asking, am I safe? If that part of your brain isn't feeling calm, isn't getting the resources and having its needs met, then you're not going to be able to engage in any other way. So you've probably heard us say, regulate, relate, reason. And that really simple 3-word phrase that we've learned from Dr. Perry, that we've got to regulate first before we can relate and connect with anyone else. And then we can start to reason and think more high level and reach that cortex part of our brain. But when we have all of this stuff coming at us, how are we going to regulate? So I just, kept this slide up in here that I think it's so awesome that we're meeting together as we are talking about different practical steps that really we are seeing the resilience, we are seeing the strength and the beauty of humanity, of society, of Franklin County and of Ohio. I mean, it's incredible to see the resilience that people are exhibiting. And as we talk about practical tips of regulating today, I have really come to believe that the brain science and the things that we do practically to regulate and understand how our brain works then manifests and looks like resilience in our society. So as we practice individually that regulation, as we practice how we build better relationships, that then looks like resilience all around us. And even just having this conversation today is that protective factor to kind of buffer against all of this risk that's coming at us. So if you read that document that we sent out, we just offered 3 quick ways to regulate. I'm just going to take them one at a time and then open up for some of that conversation. So the first one that we threw out there was predictability. This is one that hopefully you're seeing from other folks as well, but this has to come first before anything else. We have to try to establish some predictability in our daily life. We are in really unpredictable times. Thankfully, we're getting a little bit more of a routine. Some folks might set their clock by the 2 o'clock hour to check the latest updates from Governor DeWine. And so there's a little bit more routine now than maybe what there was a month ago. But when we are faced with unpredictability and chaos, that really is the essence of trauma from a neurological perspective. It's when things are unexpected, chaotic, overwhelming. That is what creates that sensitized response of, I can't even handle this anymore. I don't know what's coming at me. So predictability is really the first most important thing that we want to try to establish. In some ways that we do that, we talk about having a daily schedule with meal times, with work, with play, with relaxation. We talk about scheduling positive experiences, and that could look like a variety of different things. And one of the areas that is perhaps the most challenging is limiting those unpredictable interruptions. We are in a digital notification age. We live in an attention economy. Everyone is fighting for our attention. And so the notifications, the interruptions, the headlines can be just kind of a barrage coming at us. But that, again, is going to create that sensitization. It's going to really make us feel overwhelmed and kind of feel traumatized even more by the whole situation. So working to establish predictability is really one of the first things we can do for ourselves and that we can do for our clients and families in the midst of all the unpredictability. Trying to think about ways to build that schedule, a schedule of things that we want to experience, positive experiences, and limiting those interruptions. So that's just kind of that first thing that I wanted to throw out there as kind of a first step towards a brain-based trauma-informed response to regulating through a pandemic. And so here's kind of our first opportunity to open this up to the community with over 100 people on this call, hoping that we can get a few folks to chime in and just kind of share where are you seeing that happening for you? Where are you seeing that happening for your clients and families? And feel free to share what kind of challenges you're experiencing as well. This doesn't have to just be everything's positive. But like I said, if you are experiencing challenges with this, you probably are in a similar place. So let's hear from some of you all. How is predictability coming out to be something that is helpful and effective for you, and how is it also a challenge? While you're thinking about your answer, a few folks are asking about slides being available after the meeting. I do believe that we can do that. We can send that out to folks.
Jesse, I would just add that when we first went home, I thought, wow, this is great because it'll allow me a little more flexibility, and it felt like a treat. And as it turned out, it was more like a trick because that until I got into that regular routine, I just felt kind of undone, you know, and unproductive by the end of the day because it wasn't falling into the schedule that felt good and comfortable and safe. So I did, in the first week, I was a little more indulgent in terms of how I was doing life, and it didn't work out very well for me. And I know my grandchildren experienced the same thing until they got to the point where the kids knew that the day was going to begin exactly like it did when they were going to school. They were kind of wild. I mean, you know, and they wanted to be, parents wanted to be, wanted to be flexible because we were all having to stay home and wanted to be nurturing, and the nurturing, what they thought was nurturing in terms of allowing them more flexibility, really turned out to be kind of disorienting.
Yeah. Yeah, I see a few folks kind of commenting that sleep is a real challenge, and it's been interesting. I've been hearing that more comments from folks, and also kind of starting to bubble up into, news reporting and comments around things, that sleep is becoming a real challenge for folks. Anyone else kind of experiencing that or hearing that from folks? Yeah, that sleep is a real challenge. And from a brain research perspective, that sleep is a really important time for our brains to recover, to synthesize, and to kind of combine all of those experiences and information that we're receiving through the day. And so when sleep is difficult, it's definitely a signal that we're feeling pretty overwhelmed throughout the day. So yeah, I think that's a common challenge that a lot of people are feeling. And I think also, yeah, Tara, I think that's a great comment that you're throwing in there, that the sleep routine is different because you're starting to stay up a little bit later. And I know folks are juggling this idea of, working at home, and you may also then have a lot of other responsibilities at home, whether that's children or other things that are in your daily routine. So those clear boundaries of work from 8 to 5 aren't as set, and you don't have the physical geographical boundaries. So setting up a routine and a predictability of those things becomes even more challenging because it just kind of all bleeds together. So we stay up late doing a lot of those things. So, I think a couple of things that I've kind of just offered to folks around that is having to establish what some of those physical boundaries can look like in your home and in the space that you have. So if you have an area that's designated for work, and even if that's a small area that also offers a space, for meal times, if it's your kitchen table, but to then pack up your work and put that away when work is done. So you have that physical boundary. Our brain and our body really responds to that physical, separation. I always share the story that when I was in community-based work and I was carrying 2 cell phones, sometimes the 3 cell phone life, as many of you that are in community-based work and you're on call, what that experience is like when you have those, your personal cell phone, you've got your work cell phone, and then you get the lucky draw of having the crisis phone. So I was carrying 3 phones with me for a while. And when you have that kind of experience, it's like, I don't have any boundaries at all. And I'm always waiting for that phone to go off and surprise me. So, I had to develop the practice for myself of taking my work cell phone and turning it off, not the crisis phone, but my work cell phone, turning it off and really physically putting it in a box so that I wouldn't see it, so that it would be put away, and creating that physical boundary for myself. And so I guess I would just kind of invite you, or application to think about if you're working on that schedule is, how can you create a little bit more boundaries in terms of, this is work time, this is now I'm going to put this away. I talked with one colleague, one teacher, who was saying that he still gets dressed for work, and then when his work day is done, he changes into his home, his relaxing clothes at home. So even though he's still in the same environment at home, he changes clothes to just provide that boundary and provide that space. So
hey Jesse,
yeah,
can I add a couple of things to that?
Sure, love it. Why don't you introduce yourself, Eve?
Yeah, so I'm Eve Fitch, and I work with Jesse and the BBL team. I'm currently working with the REACT team through the Columbus Division of Fire, which is that team that responds to overdoses. We have a team that go out and then make connection with those folks to see if we can't convince them to get into treatment. My role in the team is as a family specialist to work with children who might be impacted by a substance use disorder. But that was really quick. I've been on the team for a while and helped organize the school program with BBL. So I noticed a couple of things that I think are a pattern, which is, that difficulty in setting up the routine. And I think, Jesse, you mentioned, I think it's really helpful if families sit down together and develop the schedule together, so that can get posted someplace and be accountable to it. That's helpful for all ages. I noticed some folks struggling with adolescents in terms of, not really wanting to kind of follow that schedule. But I think that the routine needs to include those opportunities for regulation throughout the day, and that you can kind of set that schedule with options for movement. You know, you're gonna, at 10:15, we're gonna do some kind of rhythmic, repetitive kind of movement, and here are our options. I think that's really important to do, and remembering to start your day out with that is incredibly important. The other theme is that sleep, and Chris Murray, I think, is on here. I noticed she had some great websites listed in an email. I'm wondering if we can't get those posted. They are apps that help with kind of that sleep disturbance.
Yeah.
That would be a helpful thing.
Yeah,
do you want me to add them to the chat, or do you want to send them later?
Yeah, go ahead and put them in the chat, Chris. That would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Sure, no problem.
Yeah, Eve, I love that comment. And I think Angela put that in there in the chat as well, about having input from the children in your family, having everyone kind of have that conversation around what does the daily schedule look like. And that's such a good example of, we're all kind of being forced with a new situation and having to learn new skills. And we kind of have skills that worked in certain settings, and now they're going to look a little bit different here. And we used to have schedules set for us by teachers or bosses or society or whatever. And now we have to kind of have that conversation together and figure out, well, what do we want our day to look like? And we have some options. And that can be a really incredible opportunity for parents and children of all ages, like you say, to have that conversation together. And it's really great to get that insight from kids to say, well, what is going to be meaningful for you today? And how can we put in some time for us to spend together? How can we provide some movement, which we'll touch base here on in a second. So that's a really great connection there. Anyone else want to? Yeah.
Sorry, this is Joanna. One piece that I think is maybe worth speaking about and a challenge I'm experiencing is that for kids who are younger than school age kids, their need for schedule is like their windows of time are so short that they can be, occupied independently. And so for parents who are trying to work from home, that is a unique challenge of, keeping my 2-year-old occupied. My 5-year-old, we can make a schedule, he can work on stuff. But with the 2-year-old, it's really tricky to get any kind of extended windows of time when both my husband and I have meetings and calls to be on. So other parents who are, with young kids, multiple young kids in the house, I think that is a strain too that that is challenging from a scheduling perspective.
Yeah, that's a great insight when we're thinking about, scheduling, and anytime we're setting things up for ourselves, for families that we're working with, keeping in mind what's the developmental level of the kid that we're working with, the child that we're trying to set that schedule up for, and that's going to vary. And also when it's a new experience, when it's a new skill, we're going to have to start with smaller experiences of it. When you start any kind of a new activity or any kind of a new skill, it has to be in smaller doses to begin with. And so that schedule, the first day, might be pretty simple. Coming up with a schedule is something we talk about a lot when we talk about learning new skills and building out pro-socials for kids or building out routines for families. Scheduling the full 18 hours of the day can feel like a lot to start with initially. So we have to start kind of in smaller bits and maybe some larger chunks, and recognizing with small kids, they might need more activities frequently throughout that time. So balancing that out is a really good point, Joanna. Really appreciate that.
Can I share?
Sure.
Jesse? Hi. Hey, this is Kelly Montgomery. And I just put a few comments down there. I'm a former teacher of younger children. And as far as setting a schedule, I think for really young children, using maybe that center approach that children are familiar with in school, where you set up a few little centers in the house, and then you could just switch those same centers. So there's the predictability of the center, but maybe some freedom for the children to kind of go in between those centers, to keep it flexible and predictable. And then also for the older children or even early teens, kind of a choice menu, a tic-tac-toe type of board where you have the children or the adolescents, write up the tic-tac-toe board and just post it visually, and you can X off ideas. That would just be a way to create some choice, but with some predictability. So just a couple
Awesome.
ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I love that, of having some choice and some control in the situation. So let me just touch base real quick on kind of, we're talking about, initially having that predictability, having those meal times, that work, play, relaxation. Somebody commented, I saw in the chat box there, that it's a real challenge to turn off those notifications. I will, be so bold to say that perhaps one of the best things that you could do for your mental health over the next few weeks is to limit the notifications on the devices. And it just takes a little bit of intentional work to do that, to take a look at that device, at whatever it is, and to change the settings, turn off some of the notifications. If you have 3 or 4 news apps and each news app is sending all of those notifications, turn those off. Take a little bit of time to set those do not disturb hours for those devices, and pushing that to be just a little bit later in the morning, so that maybe that do not disturb doesn't come on until 7:30 in the morning, and you have time from 9 p.m. at night until 7:30 in the morning where you're not getting those notifications on your phone. Taking the step, again, I know this is a challenge, but having your phone in another room so that you're not sleeping near your phone or you're not eating near your phone. Limiting those interruptions is going to be one of the things to really help our brains kind of calm down, get regulated, and get into a space where we can really find that that sense that we can know, for at least for the next few hours, I'm not going to get the latest numbers, the latest updates of things. So limiting those interruptions, if you're a leader of a team, that's being challenged and working through the situation, that can be something to brainstorm with your staff, to think about. Having some accountability with each other, making an agreement with each other. Hey, we're going to do what we can to limit those notifications that are coming at us all the time. So, there's something to throw out to you for a challenge for today. We talk about predictability. Of course, we talk about movement. Eve touched on this already, but let's, I think it'd be great to hear from the group a little bit more as to how we are coming up with ways to effectively incorporate movement. And I would especially love to hear if we can kind of shift the conversation to how we're finding this to be helpful for our clients and our families that we're working with. So hopefully, if you're familiar with our work, you know how important movement is for your brain. So your brain is, it's a collection of neurons. It's a collection of cells that are communicating with one another. And those neurons need oxygen and glucose to be effective and to work. And so when you are moving, even just the act of standing up from your chair increases the amount of oxygen in your brain and gives your brain more energy, more resources to be more effective. Movement is the single most helpful thing you can do to build a healthier brain. And the healthier your brain is, the healthier your emotions, the healthier your relationships, all of those things. So I put on that first bullet point there that your movement should be frequent, but it can be quick, or really maybe a better word there would be it can be short, in terms of you don't need to schedule a 5-mile run. I would not survive a 5-mile run. That's too much for me. But 5 minutes of walking, even just inside of the house, up and down the stairs a couple of times, around the outside of the house if that's an option. Or for my children, when we're in the school day routine, we just take a short walk around the block. You know, it's maybe 100 yards at most. It maybe takes us 7 minutes, but we go for that walk. And it's something short, but doing that more frequently throughout the day. So really thinking about building in multiple movement breaks. We're not talking about just one 30-minute exercise activity. We're talking about really every hour taking at least a couple of minutes to stand up, walk for a little bit, stretch for a little bit, listening to some music, doing some things like art projects. I saw recently that the puzzle industry is experiencing a comeback, you know, so even sitting and doing some puzzles and providing a little bit of that hand movement, coloring. Another one that has actually really been surprisingly helpful for me are simple tasks around the house. Vacuuming can provide a lot of movement. And as I'm running that vacuum, I've got that rhythmic movement back and forth. And, you know, it makes my wife really happy that the house is a little bit cleaner. So if yoga isn't your thing, actually just doing some of that simple task around the house, you know, wiping down the table, wiping down the counter, doing the dishes, that provides that movement that really helps that lower part of our brain get regulated. So I kind of threw out a couple of ideas there, and I can see that the chat box is really getting pretty active there. So I'd love to hear from folks. What are people seeing are helpful for us, and I'd especially love to hear from people what's helpful. What are some recommendations that some of your clients and families are connecting with, because this can be a real challenge when people don't have a lot of physical space. They maybe don't have neighborhood resources nearby. So what are some things that have been also helpful for clients and families?
So, hi, my name's Jessica McCormick. I'm in Erie County. I'm an SSA, so I work with people 3 to their lifespan. But some of the families of younger children, they've been using their funding source to get, a couple families have got like indoor trampolines to get the movement. Someone actually got like a door type swing and a pull-up bar, and it has like another like I can't think of what's called, like they sit in it and they're wrapped up. Someone's getting like an egg chair to mimic what they do at school. And then I suggested for some families, it's a sensory box that gets sent monthly, and it's different sensory items in there. So like the one they opened it, they called me and said, oh my gosh, and they told me everything in it. It had like slime and a ball. So to do different things. And then just my family's like with adult children, they're just going out to like the metro parks, taking walks. I think that's what we're all doing. But it's nice to see that some of the families are trying to stay. And I think the hardest thing for what they're telling me, the families, is the schoolwork, because some kids don't want to sit there on Zoom with their teacher, and they're like, we didn't go to school to be a teacher. So the schoolwork is probably the hardest part that the families are telling me right now, because they're not a teacher, and it's pretty hard to teach special education to children. So yeah, there you go.
Thank you. That was awesome. Thanks for sharing that with us. So yeah, and I see that, you know, just kind of stepping back a little bit, Cindy kind of mentioned that families are having trouble keeping track of all the communications that we're sending them. That's a really helpful comment, Cindy. I hadn't even necessarily thought about that, you know, when I talk about having fewer notifications, we have to make sure that we're not part of that problem, that we're not sending multiple communications every day and expecting them to keep up with those things. That's really good, helpful feedback.
Hey, Jesse.
Cindy also posted a question in the chat, and I think it would be important for us to all kind of chime in on that. It says, has anyone had experience or success with helping families to do the movement breaks? So helping other people pick that up, incorporate that.
Yeah, who asked that question, Debbie?
Cindy did.
Cindy, do you want to elaborate on that at all, or?
Well, I'm the same person that said our families are overwhelmed.
You've got all the great comments today, Cindy. You win the the community comment award for this meeting.
I'm getting a lot out of it too. So
Great.
Always like listening and feeling challenged and comforted by the help. I love the movement ideas, and they're great for us as adults who are, I would assume, relatively in okay places. I mean, I've had like tearful moments because some of our families have had COVID deaths, violent deaths in this 4 weeks that we've been off. So they're overwhelmed on so many levels. And for me to like add one more thing, I guess is my question. Even though this seems very helpful to me, I need a segue to say, scrap the lesson, do movement instead. That's probably what I would do. Is like,
Jesse, can I just so I so appreciate that, and I noticed another post from Nancy about kind of those adult students and being worried because they've experienced trauma. So I think we have to remember that people are experiencing a wide vast of things, and that I know that it's difficult and it seems pretty small, but when we are able to help them have some control or choice, it really does make a difference to them, because in their grief, in those horrific experiences, they had no choice. So when we can give them just a little bit of power and a little bit of ability to make some choices, sitting down and writing out a schedule. And I know, the presentation is, I know this may seem overwhelming, but I want to help you develop the schedule so that you have some choice in it. And here's what I know absolutely that it will help a little bit. It won't take all of the pain away. It won't take all of the anxiety away, but it is going to help in the long run. So yeah, I think we cannot lose sight that a lot of the folks that we're working with have a lot more on their plate than just this pandemic.
I would just add too that when we're having those conversations, being kind of cognizant of their stress response and making sure that they're regulated. And oftentimes, if it's a challenging conversation, doing so in parallel is also helpful. Maybe when you're walking and talking, maybe during an Uno game, so that there's some movement going on, you're in parallel, you're more regulated and able to have those conversations and relate with one another.
Excellent. Yeah, so one of the fundamental concepts of neuroscience, and when we talk about brain regulation, is that your brain is going to find ways to regulate somehow or another. And so I think that question, Cindy, about how do we kind of have a transition in that conversation, so I'm not just giving somebody something extra to do, but part of that conversation can be saying, well, when are you feeling even just maybe a little bit more calm in your day? Well, what are you doing? And as we're having those conversations, if they're saying, well, I just keep finding myself sitting in my rocking chair on the front porch, and I just keep rocking on that rocking chair. Great, that's a regulating movement thing that you're doing for you. I find myself just kind of looking out the window and watching the cars go by, or whatever that thing is that they're saying. And so oftentimes our connection with families, instead of let me give you something new and something additional, it's exploring what is bringing you regulation in terms of movement, and now let's do more of that. And as Eve has been saying, let's build it just a little bit into a schedule so we're intentional about it. And then let's bring somebody else in there as well. So can you rock side by side with somebody else from your family? Can you, just kind of look outside and do a simple game with somebody with your family, something like, I Spy or whatever that is, right? Something small that they're already doing, like Chris said, that then you can do side by side in parallel. So.
Jesse,
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about, I'm getting a little bit of a flavor of how important it is that people feel that we keep up with academics, which is true. But can you talk a little bit about that sequence of regulation, relationship, reason, so that, having been a former teacher, what I would say is education is important, but you can't get there unless you regulate and have that relationship, which opens up your cortex to be able to do that schoolwork. So could you just talk a minute about that, regulate, relate, reason?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just kind of, give a little preview as well. So we've been working on these community messages, and the one that I'm currently working on is sort of our top 10 tips to help students at home, because certainly this doing school at home is now a challenge for many, many, many of us in different ways. So be looking for that to come out a little bit later this week. As Jane said, definitely that regulating first. If that lower part of our brain doesn't have that sense that we're in a safe place and this is familiar and this is predictable, then our lower brain is going to be sending that alarm and that trigger of watch out. I'm not sure what's coming next. And especially when we're trying to bring academics home, when we're trying to do schoolwork at home, that's a new situation. And so all of the fears and the concerns, I saw this mentioned in the conversation there a little bit as well. What's my grade going to be? What does my teacher think about this? How am I going to show them that I'm doing the work? So there are questions and uncertainties that create that alarm system that's really going off in our lower brain, that creates that sense of dysregulation and concern. So regulating that lower part of the brain looks like doing the movement, bringing in some calming sense. And that might also be some mindfulness activities. That might also just be some deep breathing. That might also just be sitting and listening to some music, but getting to a little bit more of a regulated space. Then bringing in that relationship with someone else so that we're feeling more connected personally. And when then you have that relationship, now you can start to bring in the reasoning part, and that cortex is going to open up more and have some more learning happening. What is fascinating from an academic standpoint, and I think that a lot of teachers are reflecting on this right now, is that we learn in relationship, we learn in our environment. And as children and students are forced to learn at home, really now the question is, what am I learning in my environment all around me? If I'm part of making lunch together, how many, if you have a really young kid, how many pieces of bread make a sandwich? And we just do a simple math equation. If you have an older kid, we can talk about ingredients and we can talk about reading a recipe. As you're in your environment, in your home, that learning happens in a really different way. But it's only going to happen if the child, and I can't stress this enough, it's only going to happen if the child and the caregiver, the adult, feels regulated. So a big part of that then is encouraging the adults that we're working with to have a sense of, how do we calm our stress response so we can come alongside our child, help them to get regulated and move forward with that learning. So it's definitely something that's easier said than done for sure. So would love to hear. Yeah.
We have a comment in the chat box. Could you talk about addressing relationships, suggestions for people living alone right now?
Yeah, so let's just kind of, make sure that we touch base on what these three kind of points are. I appreciate that question. We sort of have this last way to regulate. We talk about, we talked about predictability, movement, and then finally relationships. And I started to kind of have a long list of things of doing this, but then I just thought, really, it's increasing relational interactions whenever possible in whatever way we can. Our brains are wired for relationships, are wired for those interactions. And so in any possible way that we can increase those relationships. So the question about how do we do that from a situation when we are living alone, if we're kind of isolated, that's a really unique situation and unique challenge. I guess I would maybe throw that back out to the community, to folks who are participating. If anyone is working with someone who's in that situation, or maybe they're in that situation themselves, what are folks finding as helpful practices or helpful recommendations to try to boost that relational interaction if you're by yourself?
I actually have someone who does live by herself, and her sisters go in and out once in a while, but our management, they told all the SSAs, they said, okay, here's people you're going to call weekly, here's people you're going to call every other week. So I'm calling her every week, and probably going to be more, because she's very lonely, but she was like so excited to hear from me. It is hard to understand her on the phone, but she was like, please call me, please call me. So just, we're making sure we're checking in with our people like regularly. So weekly, every other week.
Can I ask you real quick how long those phone calls with her usually are?
Last week it was like 30 minutes.
Okay.
She every time I see her, she loves to, she enjoys that contact, because she does live by herself, and her guardian is a little restrictive of what she's allowed to do,
Sure.
I guess I could say. So just hearing from me was like, great. And I told her guardian, I'm like, I'm calling her, even though she said no. I'm like, no, I'm calling her because she's lonely. She's not going to day services. That was another thing. Adults just not going to day services, completely threw their schedule off, and now they're stuck at home. So we're, as like a board, sending emails trying to come up with creative ways to keep people engaged and keep them doing it. So we're just like, anything we can think of, we just send it to our supervisors, get it to the director. So we're just, and keep making sure service, I mean, we're really lucky up here. There's a couple of providers stepping up, providing services still, and the COG has been really good getting supplies to people. So
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, something that you mentioned that, just kind of reinforces what we've been talking about is that you have that, you have that schedule, that plan. These are the people we're going to call every week. These are the people we're going to call every other week. So again, that predictability. And when we're talking about working with kids and individuals who have a trauma history, and there's that high sensitization, that high reactivity level, the first thing that we do is we try to build in predictability. And so even if I'm feeling that sense of, I don't have any connection, I'm feeling all alone, if I know on this day, I'm going to get a call from this person. If I know at least once a day, every day at 5 o'clock, at 6 o'clock, my brother or my uncle or my friend is going to check in with me. If I know that I have that predictability, my brain is going to latch on to that and going to be able to provide that internal, really that internal resilience and that internal strength to get to that point. It's not really that different from when you're sitting in a meeting and I've got 15 more minutes before I can get up and I can get a break and I can get a drink of water, or I know I can make it until lunch at noon. You have that predictability in that schedule, and we want to kind of build in that same thing with our relational interactions. So I think the other things to keep in mind with this is that our brains are used to interacting in person. There's so much that happens in the nonverbal communication, in the face-to-face interaction, in the way that our brains interact when we're in the same room with each other. We're really pulled apart from that right now. You might have felt this in the same way as I have, even if you're just walking in the neighborhood or even just, at the gas station or at the store, and you see another person in your physical space, your brain can almost feel like it can relax a little bit because it doesn't have to work so hard to interpret all of that other stuff going on. It feels very different. And it just has that different sense. So all of that to say that the more that we can boost those video chats, actual conversations on the telephone so we can hear somebody's voice, that really connects a lot more with our brain and gives us more of that relational connection that we need.
So I'd also like to add that I think we'd be surprised by the ability of folks to learn. I know sometimes it's frustrating remotely to help teach them, but I know that I have an older father that lives with me. He's 89, and he and I have been learning, he's been learning how to do Messenger so that he can see people, using his phone to see people, because it's really, really important, that face-to-face. So I think if you can talk to folks, use their resources, get them to use those so that they can really connect with people by seeing them. It's a really helpful thing. The other thing that I think is helpful is to help connect them to Facebook groups. So many people are on Facebook. And so we, the React team has an alumni group for folks that are in recovery. And we have established a group for them, a Facebook group. And the connections that they're making via that Facebook group are pretty phenomenal. And so people are posting video kind of inspirational things. We're kind of doing some tutorials on baking. Baking's a great regulating activity. So if you can kind of encourage that piece, create some of the opportunities for them to join those kinds of groups, that's another way that they can connect, even though they may be living alone.
I have to say, I love a comment that was made by Dr. Kennedy that just wanted to call that out, that everybody in his or her family, I'm not sure who that is responsible, has selected someone they're going to connect with on a regular basis, and they hold each other accountable to keeping up with that. So if, you know, I'm thinking, well, we could do the same thing either internally or with a group of friends and keep up with holding each other accountable for making those connections, particularly with people who are have some other physical challenges or you know, are dealing, perhaps particularly people who live by themselves.
It's a fantastic example of those keys to resilience that we talk about in terms of when someone is depending upon me and I have that responsibility to somebody, it builds that connection to community, it builds that perseverance and that sense of hope. And it's really the essence of attachment. You know, that child that I'm raising I have a commitment to that child. And so that keeps me going, and it nurtures that child, and we start to have that back and forth dynamic of that interaction. So if I have a commitment to call and to connect with somebody else, it benefits them and it benefits me. And you have that two-way relational interaction, which is really powerful. It's a great example of how that moves forward. Yeah.
If I could just add to that right before you move on, you know, thus far, I know we've talked a lot about how we have that interaction with people that we're working with or families that we're working with. And we have a really varied audience here of educators and community service workers and first responders and DD, and I mean, caseworkers from all over the place. And all of that's really important in the how we work with families, but it's important to remember too, that regulation and relationship piece is really important for us personally as well. I've seen a lot of comments in the chat box thus far about people reaching their limits at work and too many notifications. And it's not just overwhelming for our kids to do homework, it's overwhelming for all of the emails we're receiving and not feeling like we're doing enough and all of that. So that regulation and that relationship building and taking those brain breaks actually helps us be better too. And Jesse, you have a really good quote, and I can't remember what it is about working at home during a crisis versus.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly who I heard it from first, but, you know, we all keep kind of saying, well, you know, are you working from home? Yeah, I'm working from home. And really, the reality is we are all staying at home during a crisis and trying to work. So, you know, really most of us were not built for this work from home situation. And there's a lot of new skills that we're having to learn. Okay, so we'll give ourselves some grace around that. But, you know, really, we're not working from home. This is a unique situation for all of us. And so we're at home, staying safe. and we're trying to work at the same time. And so, yeah, Debbie, your point is really well made. Practicing these things for ourselves, to practice that self-regulation. And every time we talk about this content, we're always reminded that we all have a brain. We all are in this boat together. And so the more we are learning these skills of self-regulation and movement and relational connection, it's going to be beneficial for the students, the clients, the children, the families that we're working with. So
the reality is we can't regulate somebody else if we ourselves are not regulated. So the point is kind of invalid if we ourselves are not in that state of, calm and alert to be able to help other people. So regulation is just really important for all of us.
100%.
Hey Jesse. This is Kelly from Westland High School. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for being on.
I just I know it's a varied group. I see it keeps getting larger. It's like 127 people. One of the things that we've done, for our students is created that schedule. So I know I'm kind of behind. I've been listening, but just hadn't interjected yet. I'm going to try and share it with you guys so that if you all want to use it or a version of it, our acronym is ROAR, and what we were trying to do was to share something for our kids, and we shared it in several different languages, but it's based on our acronym and giving them something to follow, I guess.
Yeah.
And I created this and then put it up on our website, and we sent it out, and these are active links at the bottom. But I just felt like our kids needed something to something that could give them, I don't know, a path. When we sent out a Google form asking our kids what do they need, and we got about 1,200 responses out of our about 2,000 students, and the majority of them said organization. Please organize me, please help me, I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing, because we basically went from something very structured and traditional to you have all of these Google Classrooms, and where do I even start? So we sent that out. We've been sending it out in multiple languages, and then our staff also is visiting I guess probably more like around between 20 and 30 homes per day. And we're dropping off free pizzas. One of our math teachers owns Romeo's. So he donated 20 pizzas a day, and then our staff raised $5,000 in like 24 hours, which is amazing. And he is now giving 40 pizzas a day at cost. And so we're able to do those home visits. We wear gloves and masks, but putting eyes on kids and checking with families. Even on Easter Sunday, it was amazing. And then personally, in terms of, I have 5 kids, and trying to do that, and just adults and cats, dogs, and all that stuff. But I've been trying to connect with 5 people a day outside of my family, trying to get to see their face in some way. Even through Google Voice, kids tend to respond to text messages more quickly, and then getting them to come on through Google Meet, through their those kind of things.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I think the connection is what, for kids, in my experience, I think it's the connection. That's what they keep saying. We miss you. We just want to come back. And when we are able to see them face to face, it's a big morale boost for us. So
yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. I see a few folks would like to kind of see that resource. So you could email that to me or Debbie, or put your email in the chat box there if folks want to get that from you. So you're 100% right. That connection is what it's all about. And it's there. I think this is one of those examples. It's true about life in a lot of ways, that you don't really understand the power of something till you don't have it anymore. And I love hearing both teachers and students just say how much they miss that personal connection with one another. It just reinforces the power and the value of that social connection and human interaction. So Let me just, close out here. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And just let you know where we're going with these things. You should have received, if you're kind of on our mailing list, both that first message that Debbie put out, and we had a second message that we shared out last week that was all about staying close while social distancing. And that's all focused on some practical tips of how to do this relationship piece when we have to be physically apart. And Eve always is reminding me it's physical distancing, not social distancing. So recognizing that we're still being social, but we're physically apart. And so Debbie should be putting that in the chat box there for you if you haven't already got that. We are hoping to continue to have these future community conversations. This was incredibly valuable for us, and I hope it was helpful for you all. So we're going to try to do this on a regular basis, and keep an eye out for another invitation and more information about that. I know there were a lot of, yeah.
Jesse, if someone is not on our mailing list, how do they get on the mailing list?
So
I would ask that if you were able to register via the SurveyMonkey and stuff, we have your emails and you can be added to that. I know I saw some comments that was full. So I do want to be able to share out slides and those messages with you via email. So I know several of you have put that in the chat box, but if that's something that you would like to do and you want to be part of the mailing list, please go ahead and put that in there. I'm going to save the chat after we're all done. So I'll have that all on record and can add that, add all of those as well. So.
Hey, Debbie, could you do one other thing?
Sure.
I noticed a chat earlier about, I think we have some representatives from child welfare.
Yeah.
And I know that they talked about, kind of workers being frightened because they're really still out there working. They may join our information sharing Thursday evening at 5. It's specific for first responder families, but I consider our child welfare first responders. So if they are interested, maybe they could put that in their chat and we could send them the notice for that conversation. It'll be similar information, but a little bit more specific for those folks who have people who are still really actively working and have that additional stress.
I can try to put that up briefly here. So yeah, we'll continue to connect with folks. If you put your email in there, we'll follow up with you. As you hopefully saw there, you can also email information at helpmykid.org, and that'll go right to putting your name on that emailing list, that full listserv. My email is right there. If you have questions or are wondering about future opportunities. And we just really want to say thank you for all of your work in the community. We are committed to supporting and engaging and connecting with all of our community partners, all the variety of partners. When we think about sharing messages like this to our partners, it's such a wide range, which is both challenging and really exciting to think about just how many people we can engage with. And I proudly fly an Ohio flag outside of my house every day, because I just could not be prouder of the work that our community is doing in so many ways. So it's awesome to connect with all of you in this way. And please continue to keep an eye out. We'll continue to share written messages that are hopefully helpful for you, and you can share with your clientele and with your agency, and look for more of these community meetings together moving forward. Any other closing comments? Then I will post that link that Eve was talking about for the conversation with first responders and child welfare workers. So here's that one coming up right here. If you want to sign up for that, there's the link for that one. All right, thank you, everyone.
We'll leave the chat open for just a couple of minutes so people can continue to put in emails or requests to be added to things. And so, yeah, thank you again for joining us today.
Stay safe, stay connected. Appreciate everybody.
Thanks again.